Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the After Service podcast. My name is Barry. This is my co-host Christian, and we're here today with Mikkel, the CEO of Mikkelen, CEO and founder, I have to say. Welcome, Mikkel.
Thanks a lot.
Perhaps we can take a trip down memory lane and talk about how you started this thing in the first place. It started by brewing some beer at home, basically.
Yes, I guess. I mean, it actually started before that. I'm an old man now, so it's a long time ago. I'm born in 75, and I was raised in north of Copenhagen, and I started running when I was a young guy, and quickly became fairly good at it. So during my high school time, I didn't drink alcohol at all. One of the few people in the world, or at least in Denmark, that didn't
especially
drink alcohol
in Denmark,
high school. That didn't drink, and then after high school, I went to the States on a running scholarship, and kind of discovered beer in the US. Came back, stopped running because of injuries and just too much pressure from coaches and people, and then I started drinking beer. And then I was involved in founding a beer club for young. We were about 20 young guys meeting every second month, tasting beers back in late 90s. We didn't have a big selection of beers in Denmark. And then in 2003, I decided to try homebrewing because we started getting these Danish craft breweries, and I thought it was interesting, new flavors, new styles. So I started homebrewing just from scratch, went to the library, got a few homebrew books. This is before...
Yeah, I was just about to ask, how do you get started with it, right?
Thing. Yeah, I went to the library and...
YouTube was not even
a
thing there. There was the dating app back then, I think.
And then I started reading about it. At the same time, I had become a teacher and got my first full-time job in 2003 as a chemistry and physics and math teacher. Started homebrewing and went from there.
It's almost like Walter White from Breaking Bad. But you do beer instead of meth.
I guess there have been an article in Vice magazine or whatever it is once that called me the Walter White of beer. So I guess there's a similar story.
Spot on.
I mean, it was just from interest, and then obviously having chemistry education is helpful when you do the process of making beer. But besides that, I had no background.
And how does that hobby become Mikkelen?
Then I brewed in my kitchen very small batches, 20 liters to begin with, and 50 liters in plastic buckets, and then as a home brewer, you start giving out beers to your friends in order to get some feedback.
I got beer club perhaps as well.
Exactly, yeah, and I got good feedback, which you get because people want to give you good feedback, so they get more beer. If they say it tastes awful, then they will likely not get more of it. So. So then, I thought it would be interesting to get feedback from people that I didn't have in my close surroundings, and then I started kind of selling beers a little bit out of a small shop in Vesterbro in Copenhagen, which is really not allowed when you brew it in your kitchen. But then these beers were shipped out. You have this community of beer collectors and beer geeks that rate beers, and then they bought my beers and shipped them out, and so I got reviews or ratings from people from all over the world, Japan and the US and everywhere. I got really good reviews. And then in 2005, one of my beers that I had brewed in my kitchen was voted on. Back then it was called Rate Beer, like a rating site where it's kind of the biggest in the world. Big Breakfast was voted the best stout in the world, of all stouts, and I had only brewed 100 bottles in my kitchen. So I thought maybe I should do something about this, and then I founded the company and started brewing professionally.
At
least tried brewing professionally. I didn't start a brewery. I didn't invest in money in brick and mortar. I just went.
But I guess you had the timing on your side here, right? Because there wasn't a lot of companies doing these special beers in Denmark at that moment.
It was good timing because we went actually from the late 90s. I think we had about 10 breweries in Denmark, and then in the beginning of the 2000s and actually in 2005, I think we had 35 new breweries in Denmark. So this is where it all explodes in Denmark from being a country with one beer style, the macro-produced lager, to to having a lot of small regional breweries.
Yeah, and then also people actually being ready to start drinking those different beers. I just kind of find it
Exactly.
funny also that basically you're brewing beer at home and you get voted the best stout in the world by just brewing.
Yeah, I think it was a coincidence. I was very inspired by American craft beers because they had, beer and interesting beer. We don't call it craft beer, but specialty beer is started in Europe, Germany, Belgium, the UK. And I was inspired by that, but then the Americans, they started taking these styles and making them more expressive, more wild, which I thought was fun, and then that's what I did as well. So.
Was it any sort of advantage to you that we already have a lot of beer brands from Denmark? Now I'm thinking Carlsberg, who was Liverpool's shirt sponsor back then. You know, Danish beers had a reputation out there in the world. Did you also kind of leverage that a little bit?
I think back then not in 2005, because I know we have a reputation of beers, but it's not a reputation of interesting beers.
No, that's true.
But I think, about then, Noma popped up as a restaurant and got a lot of attention. Danish gastronomy got a lot of attention, and I think that helped even more. That helped more than
That's interesting.
You also brew beer specifically for Noma, right? Or at least they served Mikkeller beers there as well.
Yeah, I did back then, yes. But this whole focus and hype around Danish gastronomy just exploded back then, which I think helped a lot. And then obviously Denmark is known for good quality, good design and out in the world, and I think that helps a lot. We are a country that is known for making good stuff in general, so people don't have to ask questions if it's Danish, if it's going to be good quality in general. So I think that helped.
And how did it move forward from them? You started brewing the beer at home, you noticed some success. Like, how did you take a next step in terms of also production, taking it into a bigger thing? You said you founded Mikkeller. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, then I kind of founded the company, or I registered a company in the end of 2005, and then I was like, I need to brew bigger batches than 50 liters. I was actually at 100 liters back in the kitchen back then. And then I contacted some breweries in Denmark and asked, can I come and make my beer at your brewery? You don't have to do anything. I'll come brew it, package it, and then buy it from you, and then that's it. So that's how I started so-called contract brewing, which later turned into what people call gypsy brewing, which is a term that's named after people that don't have their own brewery, which I guess today we still brew a lot of contract brewing around the world, but we also do own some breweries. But that's how I started. And the reason why I didn't invest in a brewery was because what I saw was, as I said, we had a lot of new breweries in Denmark back then, and this is before the financial crisis, so they all went and got a lot of money and built a brewery. But if you do that, you have obligations, you have loans, you have to pay back, and then you have to brew beer that people want, not what you want to brew. And Denmark being a country of 5 million back then people, there are not a lot of customers. So if everybody drinks pretty much Carlsberg at that time. So if you want to brew something that people want, you have to brew something similar, not too expressive and too insane or too creative. And that was not my purpose. My purpose was to kind of do what I saw in the US. So I didn't want to have ties to a brewery and a bank and bank loans and stuff. So just went to a brewery in Fyn to begin with, Ørbæk, and made a batch of 2,000 liters and sold that. And then I made the next batch with the money that I made, and it went from there. So organic growth.
How did you sell them in the first place in the beginning?
I actually got a Danish distributor, and I got a lot of a Danish distributor in Denmark, and then I got because of that stout, I released the first official beers like in May 2006 at a beer festival, and because of that Birgit Breakfast Stout that was voted the best in the world, I had a lot of attention from all over the world, pretty much, from the US and all over Europe, and so when I released beers officially, I had quite a lot of customers already, importers from different countries. I actually started exporting to the States like immediately, which is kind of crazy for.
When did you start opening your own beer bars?
But then I grew organically for a few years, and didn't have my own brewery. Started brewing in Belgium, and then got more and more attention and had a lot more people wanting my beers and wanting to visit Denmark and taste my beers and stuff. And I didn't have a place to show them. Because I didn't have a brewery. So then I decided in 2010 to open my first bar. Pretty much to have a place to serve my beers in the right environment with the right glasses, the right music, the right stuff on the walls, and all that stuff.
Basically, the flagship, just people come and visit.
Yeah, just to have I'm very detail oriented, and I wanted my beers to be served in a perfect environment, because I care a lot about my beers. So I hate if I go to a bar and then I get a glass that is not clean, or the lines are not cleaned well, and the music is bad, or the service is rude or something. So that's what I wanted to.
Yeah. Could you describe
to control
the perfect Mikkeller environment for a beer to enjoy?
I think that has changed, but back then the concept was, in 2010, all bars with beer, craft beer, all beer bars were kind of the same. They were made specifically for men, because only men drank beers back then, pretty much. And they were dark, kind of like a man cave kind of thing, with a lot of beer stuff on the walls, a lot of advertisement, and
often still ashtrays,
big old pint glasses with IPAs, and not at all made for young people, not at all made for females, and that's what I wanted to change. So we made a light environment, white walls, a lot of small details, small nice-looking details. We had glasses on still kind of like wine glasses. Not too loud music. Good, attentive service. And I think that stood out a lot. I know that stood out a lot. It invited a lot of different people, and we quickly saw young people coming to the bar. We saw young people, young females, young coming to the bars in groups, which I thought was amazing to see a group of 20-year-old females sitting, talking about beer, sharing beers and stuff. We hadn't seen that before. It's still kind of our take on what beer should be. It should be for everybody. It should be inclusive. I think today you need to create a little bit more fun and a little more experience with beer. So we are also changing our way of seeing things. But at least back then that was purpose.
Also completely different times, of course. Like back then it was way more, as you said, about educating people, or like introducing the new kind of beer to people.
Yeah, for a lot of people it was new. Craft beer was not a thing it was something you had to learn about, and it was very different from what people thought about beers back then.
Yeah, and about the time when you opened the first like Mikkeller bar, so to speak, you also introduced the iconic Mikkeller design on the cans and the bottles, right? About on the same time. Can you tell us?
About the same time. I mean, to begin with, the first couple of years, I used a friend to do my labels and stuff. I mean, I didn't have any employees until I opened my first bar. I had one employee, and then I used her freelance. I was very influenced by Danish or Scandinavian design, like very clean lines, very, very minimalistic. And then I met this guy, Keith Shaw, in Washington, actually in Philadelphia, in I think 2010. By coincidence, I was going there to do some events and stuff, and then he contacted me, and then he did a label, just a trial label, and I really liked it with these two characters that we have used ever since, Henry and Sally, and that was kind of the new era of our kind of branding, which at that time stood out. I think it's actually still standing out in the beer world. We tried to what we tried to create was an atmosphere where it was fun and again inclusive and a little bit childish, not too up your own, as you say, because a lot of beer labels are that. And then, just do something different. We wanted to tell a story about the beers and the labels, which also was new.
Yeah,
I think when you see a label, you kind of have an idea what you're going to drink, which I think.
Yeah, it says like there's way more
new.
color involved in it as well, right? Like it just, again, if you also want to reach a different audience, it's maybe just a lot more inviting than just the typical brown bottle with a simple label on
with
it.
some hop cones and
Exactly.
all that
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
that is every bottle in the Netherlands. Like,
If we fast forward to the present day, how is Mikkeller looking as a organization now? How big are you? How many bars do you have worldwide? And how is the organization built up, really?
We are. I mean, our headquarters is in Copenhagen, in Vesterbro. We are not too many in the headquarters. Actually, we cut down a lot since COVID, and because we got a lot more efficient. I'm the CEO. I have a really good team. I have a management team, and then we are about 25 full time only at the headquarters. Then we have about 40 bars and restaurants around the world. About half of them in Denmark, and mostly in Copenhagen. Rest outside Denmark, quite a lot around Europe and in Asia. Opening new ones again. We didn't open a lot of new ones and the years after COVID. I think we are about 500 to 600 employees in total.
How has that been for you to transition from being, someone who's a bit of a beer nerd, I can say, like, really playing around with the craft, to now owning a pretty big business? Like,
I mean, it's been a very, very rough learning curve from when I started. I said I got my first employee in 2007, I think. We were two dudes just driving around in a van delivering beers in Copenhagen. Then I opened my bar in 2010, got my second employee. We grew organically until 2015, opened a few more bars, but never took loans, never had investments. And then in 2015, since Mikkeller had become fairly popular around the world, and we saw a lot of opportunities, but we were pretty limited with the staff and with, I think we were 10 people back then in total. Then I met these two guys who run an equity firm, an American equity firm. I took an investment from them. I got to know them, good friends, and then I took an investment from them in order to grow the business. And from 2015 till COVID, we grew quite quick. I was still the CEO. We went from having 4 locations, I think, to we were actually at almost 50 locations at that time, having a lot of employees.
Must have felt strange to change the business in such a big way.
Strange. I mean, if you're in it, you don't think too much about it. Everything happens so fast, and you're so busy. I mean, I worked 18 hours a day and never slept, and always traveling and constantly, doing stuff. I think in 2018 we opened 12 new locations, so every month we had a new, and still not a very big team. And I come from being a school teacher. That's my only education. I don't have a brewing education. I don't have a business education. So I had to learn everything from scratch. But I've also been involved in everything in the business from pretty much.
Back then,
I've done everything. I even was the warehouse manager and packaging pallets for Italy and doing taxes and VAT and salaries and in general do all the bookkeeping and doing recipes and all that stuff. So I've done pretty much everything. So that it's just been self-taught the whole way. Has
there been any major fuck-ups along the way? Things you look back at now where like, I wish I didn't do it like that?
Yes, obviously. When you do something like when you've done something like I do, not everything is just gone smoothly. I don't see it as. I mean, the biggest you can say fuck up is probably in 2015 we bought a brewery in San Diego in California. Being a fairly small team, we had good business going on in Europe and we were very busy, and then we buy a fairly big brewery in San Diego, I think 10 or 11 time zones away, which
literally
was
about
extremely
as far as
challenging because when we're kind of done working in Denmark in the afternoon, then they wake up in San Diego, and then we start all over. And running a business, I think at some point we had 40 employees in San Diego. It's extremely difficult from Denmark, and it was very challenging. I think if I had known how big of a challenge that was, I wouldn't have done it again. Again, it was fun, and I'm happy about what we achieved, and we did some amazing beers and put Mikkeller on the map in the US, but we also lost a lot of money on that.
Are you still in that full pace scaling mode, or are you now more calm in everything? You said you worked 18 hours a day. Are you still doing that, for example?
No, because if I did that, I wouldn't be alive anymore. I think it was too much. I was younger back then, and I have a very good team today. I'm very dependent on my team and my employees. I still work a lot. Mikkeller is still 24/7 for me. I think about it all the time. Every time I go on a vacation, even with my kids, there's always some. I try not to involve them too much, but there's always some Mikkeller involved in the hidden. It means a lot to me still. It is my whole life, but I try not to work as much as I did back then, because it's not sustainable.
Looking back, do you also wish maybe that you build a team around you quicker, for instance, to take over responsibilities as you have now? Or is that not something?
I don't. No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I wish, but we did what we did, and we did it the best way we could, and I'm happy about what we achieved. But then came COVID. Obviously, we were walking on the clouds, and then came COVID, and like everybody else, especially in our industry, I think in the food and beverage industry, we just completely broke down. We lost on the 11th of March. I think we lost 98% of our revenue in one day when Denmark shut down and the rest of the world shut down. And so obviously that changed a lot. At the same time, I hired an external CEO, because we were at a point where we had become fairly big, at least for a Danish mid-sized company, a craft brewery, and I was ready to concentrate on something else, which would be more creative and not run a business with all the stuff that comes with that. But then we were shut down, and the world changed completely.
And was that before you hired the CEO, or like did you hire the CEO just before COVID came on?
I think we were in the process, so we hired him pretty much the same day.
But you're fortunate though, because you were still selling the cans, and that's, I guess, a big part of the business. So of course the bars were hit really hard by it.
But the problem back then was that we didn't have any sales in supermarkets. Only in Irma in Denmark, very small supermarket chain. Yeah. So all our customers, the small shops, were closed down.
But is that the period then where you transitioned more into that type of business?
Exactly. That's exactly what we did. We had zero. We didn't have any revenue. Our bars got closed down. All our restaurants. And then all our customers as well, and so we had to do something. We were pretty desperate. One thing that we tried was we did kind of like the Yemmies, where you deliver ice cream, because you were actually allowed to go to deliver beers to people if they came outside. So
that's really a common story.
So just a draft car. Or?
Yeah, I mean, it was zero revenue. It was very, very small. But then, that's
still the mentality. A lot of the restaurant owners we speak with, the way they made it through COVID was also being creative. Start doing delivery of food and all that.
We had to find solutions.
Do you think you would have gone into that whole retail selling the cans in the way you did if it wouldn't have been for COVID? Or would you just have opened more bars?
It's hard to say. I would say today, when I probably would have, because I've kind of changed my way of seeing things and the way of seeing Mikkeller, because the thing was back then, we kind of created beers for people that knew. We wanted people to be involved in our products and in the beer worlds, which is common for craft breweries, that they have a following, and then those are the people that you engage with. I've changed my mindset today. I want to create beers for everybody. I think everybody in the world should have access to good craft beer, to good beer, and that's also why we're doing a lot of initiatives now to get out to more people. And being in the supermarkets, you reach a lot more people than not being in the supermarket. So I think it's a good thing today. Maybe it wouldn't have happened then, but it was necessary, as I said. Supermarkets were the only place where you could actually sell beer.
And you also just split the way you get the revenue come into the company, right? By both having an extra distribution channel in that sense. So it's also a smart thing to do. You mentioned you stepped down as CEO for a while back then, but then it took about 2 years before you stepped back in, approximately, I believe. Huh?
Yeah.
Can you talk? How did that happen? Why did you step back in?
Yeah, it was obviously, as I said, it was a terrible time with COVID, and the business was pretty much going bankrupt. And I had an external CEO that came from a big company, had different ways of seeing things. I think Mikkeller was still, even though we were and are a good sized company, we are not a huge company. We're not a big corporate company, and running it kind of as a corporate company, which is what happened, was not the solution to Mikkeller. And we had some conflicts with the way my CEO saw things and the way I saw things. Obviously, the best thing for me would be to step out, because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense to have an external one. But we just didn't see the same ways of doing things. So at some point I decided that, and we were in a really bad shape financially, Mikkeller, and had to take more investments and stuff in order to survive. And then at some point in 2022, I was like, either I leave the company or I take over and save it, because I think I'd been working with it for quite a few years already, for 17 years, 16, 17 years. I know the company in and out. I know all the processes. I know what people like, what they don't like, what works and what don't work. And so I thought if somebody have to save it, it would be me. And that's why
what did you do when you came back to save? Like, it was the immediate change you kind of came with when you came back as a CEO?
I mean, we have the one thing, we had grown from being a fairly small team, if you are founder driven and you hire people that are close to you and you work very closely, and we were working night and day, and which is what you do in a startup in a growing business too. And then with the new CEO, we had big ambitions. You hire people to meet your ambitions, so you hire a lot more people that you actually need, or you might need later. So we were, at that time, we were about 50 full-time employees in the office, and as I said, now we are less than 25. So the first thing I did was to start cutting, and I know it sounds evil, but we were people that we just didn't have. We had processes that didn't match the size of the company, and maybe it would have matched the size of the company had we grown to 3 times the size. But that was just not the time, and we didn't have the money to do that. We had created processes that just didn't make sense in terms of production and stuff. So I started to cut down. Pretty much started to cut expenses and then streamline processes in order to get to a place where we were efficient and not too set on the future growth.
What type of hires did the former CEO, or like what type of position did he implement in the company that you got rid of? Was it like data analytics or stuff like
Something
that?
Like and supply chain and marketing and all that stuff that is good to have if you need it, but it's very bad to have and pay for if you don't need it.
Especially during tough times.
Especially during tough times. I mean, I'm not blaming my former CEO. I'm just saying that the timing was wrong. And I mean, I don't know if that's what's the case, but we were in a really bad shape. We were almost bankrupt in the end of 2022.
It's also a very unfortunate moment to come in, of course. As a
of course,
COVID,
it was rough for him, and I wouldn't be in his position. It just didn't work out.
But that's also good to come back from that. And as you said, like being faced with, do I want to let the company go in a way, or do I want to save it? I guess it was also an obvious decision for yourself to make in a way.
I mean, we also had some locations, as I said, back then we had about 50 locations, like owned and operated, that didn't, and some of them didn't work out. And, you know, if you're in a growing phase and everything is going kind of well, you also tend to look at things that are not going well and say, oh, we'll fix it, or that maybe that's fine that you lose money here, and then you make them there. But we also decided to close everything that didn't financially made sense.
That includes San Diego, right?
That included the brewery in San Diego, yes, and everything we had in the States, actually. We had 5 or 6 bars in California. It's a very tough decision, obviously, because you've spent so much time and money and energy on that, but it just made sense.
And it's also part of the passion of course, like where it all started in a way, right? The inspiration coming from there. So
Exactly.
because you don't have anything in the US anymore, right? No.
No, not right now. I can say that I'm happy about that at the moment, but we'll see what happens later.
Is it still a dream to go back there and to make it work?
No, I mean, we're not focused on the US at the moment. We're very focused on China and Southeast Asia because we see that as the craft beer market in the States is not in a good shape right now. There's too many people or too many craft breweries. People are not drinking alcohol anymore. A lot less people, young people are drinking a lot less alcohol. It's not the same. It's not as bad in Europe, but we kind of see the same trend. Beer sales are going down a lot in general.
It's a new generation in general that just drinks less, right? Like,
drink less alcohol. Yeah. Then obviously we have a lot of alcohol-free beers, which is growing.
You know why they drink less?
There are a lot of theories. People want to be more healthy.
Yeah.
In general, there's also COVID could also be a part of the reason they didn't learn to drink. You know, you learn in high school, you learn to drink from the older generation.
But it's very much indeed the social, like socially also the way bars have way tougher time now, right? Like nightlife in general is also
people don't go out.
declining.
You can be social on your phone instead. You can be at home being social. You don't have to sit in a bar to talk to people anymore. There's a lot of reasons, and what we see and we don't talk a lot about our products anymore, our beers, and say, no, we want to create the best beers in the world. We say, and we have actually done that for a while, and which a lot of other craft breweries are doing now. We say we want to create the best beer experiences because people want experience when they go out. They do. I mean, the bars where the purpose is to get drunk, like stupid drunk and cheap beer and stuff, they're struggling a lot. So we try to create experiences, and the experience could be around the beer as well. Beer that you can talk about, beer that you can share, and yeah.
It's a bit more like you drink wine, right? No one goes out to a wine bar just to get pissed, right?
Get drunk. Yeah, you can say that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it still happens though, but it is indeed not the intention. It's not the intention. But I'm curious, like, why does Asia work so well at the moment?
Asia, for us, I mean, in general, Asia is. It's not like the economy in Asia is booming like the rest of the world. It's not like that, but it's a very immature beer market. It's a very new beer market. So there's a lot of potential for growth, and we actually do see growth in some Asian countries. It's unexplored for Europe or for Western craft beer brands. There's a lot of focus right now from Western craft beer brands because of the environment in the rest of the world. But since we have been there for quite a while with our own bars and I put a lot of focus on it since for quite some years, we have a head start.
You have a big brand already.
Yeah, and people, a lot of people know us, and I'm not saying that a lot of the general population in China know Mikkeller, but a lot of people in the craft beer industry know Mikkeller.
Yeah, so the people who are passionate about beers, they already know who you are, and
exactly.
that helps a lot.
And I was just in Korea last week, and we're launching one of our beers, Burst IPA, in a convenience store chain, which is fairly new that a Western craft beer brand is in a convenience, kind of like a 7-Eleven, which we have big hopes for. So.
But there they don't. It's not common at all to have that. Or
no, it's not common to see that, and we are in a position where we can do that. It's which I think is amazing because then we reach a lot more people than we would otherwise.
Makes sense. You just mentioned also that when you were working with the brewery in San Diego, like big time difference, super difficult to manage that. How is that different the other way around? Because I guess time difference wise, when we look at that part of Asia, you kind of look at the same. They are ahead, of course. That's maybe an easier thing, but.
You don't have people on the ground in Asia, right?
We have a few people on the ground, but it's different than running a brewery because I mean we have and we have some good partners also in some of our our own retail. We have partners in pretty much all of them.
Yeah,
you have to have that when you open something in Japan or China or something. But again, it would be easier to just run everything in Denmark, but it's less
also
fun.
more limited.
Yeah, the world is a fun place, and there's a lot of opportunities. So
you mentioned in 2022, you said you were almost on the bankruptcy.
Yeah.
How is things going now then?
Knock on wood. It's actually going really well. We had our best year last year, our best financial year.
Congrats.
Thanks a lot. And 26 is looking to be even better. The Q1 is trending quite a lot better than last year, which is pretty weird that I can say that because I don't think you'll hear a lot of craft breweries say that. I think we're doing. I spent since 22 till pretty much the end of or the beginning of 25. I spent my whole time cleaning up the business, which I think have created a good situation for us. And then we are back in growth mode. We want to grow again. We want to do maybe a little bit smarter than before COVID. We don't want to do it. I mean, back then, as I said, we felt that we could walk on water. I think we have gotten older and more smart. So now we'll do it more. In a pace where we actually know that we're doing it right. But we do have big ambitions for the next. We have a 5-year plan right now, a 5-year strategy, and we have big ambitions. We'll start doing franchise as well. We have never really done that, and franchise obviously is a way of growing without having a lot of investments, which I think is the right timing right now because, as I said, we have a brand that a lot of people know also in Asia. My kind of challenge has always been that, like personal challenge has always been that the brand is a lot stronger than the business, and that just annoys me. That when I travel to Asia, for example, I hear a lot of people asking for my beers and they can't get it. So that's what we want to change now. I want to do a lot more own retail, franchise bars.
Like, why is the brand so well recognized? Is that, of course, the cans are easy recognizable. I get that, and you got some good reviews as well. But is it those things that basically carried it, or
I guess the stuff in the can is the thing
as
that
well.
needs to carry it.
But everybody, there's a lot of breweries that makes good beer. I mean, I
just doesn't sound like you had a
beer.
big branding strategy at some point where you're like, we're gonna come really well with this branding. It
not
kind of
at
just
all.
happened,
It
right?
kind of started with that stout from the beginning, right?
I think we took some decisions. I mean, not that we knew what that would have the effect, but we've done a lot of stuff during the years that have grown the brand. Like, for example, we have a running club, which everybody has a running club today.
You're not the first guy in this table also.
You might have been having the first running club, maybe, but everyone has them.
Everybody has a running club today, but we have one of the biggest running clubs in the world, which happened by coincidence. I think me being a runner and something like combining sports and beer and running and beer was a new thing. And when we started the running club in 2014, it didn't make any sense. People were like, you cannot run and drink beer.
Did it start here in Copenhagen, the running club?
Yeah. It quickly grew to the rest of the world. And today we are in like 200 cities around the world. It connects people with the brand in a different way than just going into a supermarket and pick some cans off the shelf and then drink them. We have our bars and restaurants, which is also fairly unique. I mean, a lot of breweries have a bar today, but we did it early. We have a lot of different concepts. We do festivals, beer festivals. We have a big one in Copenhagen in May next month for the 15th time or something.
Let's go there actually, though. That's not a bad idea to do that.
It's fun. But we also have it in Faroe Islands. We have it in Beijing and in Tokyo.
Faroe Islands as well?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So I think we have engaged with people in a different way than other brands, beer brands, and I think that has been a big part of the.
I think the point you just mentioned with the running club is perhaps also a very good way to summarize where we are today in terms of especially how young people are, like the way more aware of health. So they will run, that is socialization. And then after the run, it's the same, like they go to a bakery, have a bun, or they indeed have a beer. I think that's way more the way how people do it right now.
Yeah. You can do something good for yourself, and then you can
it's a compromise, right? Like you do something good, and then you're allowed to let it slack a little bit. And I think that's.
But it's always interesting because my bet will be there will come a moment again, a new generation that will start drinking more alcohol.
Probably, yes. It goes in waves.
Changing, right? So.
Yeah, it depends also, I guess, like the general perception of it, like with alcohol, like how much is it pushed further and further, of course, because I do think once one generation is like, they start realizing also the impact of alcohol, it can also go further away, I think.
I think as long the good thing with this is that I think people drink better alcohol. I mean, if you want to drink alcohol, why buy a beer for 3 kroner and then get drunk out of that? Why not have an experience out of it? And I think that's what we see right now.
And I think that is also a good thing, that it's not drinking to get drunk, but it's to
to
enjoy it, to have the experience.
Yeah.
And also indeed, like, the alcohol-free market, to build that up, like, there's also a whole new opportunity.
Yeah, that's a very growing market also for us. It's actually 50% of our total
50?
sales. Yeah.
Wow.
50?
Worldwide.
Yeah. I didn't expect
We
that.
are,
but a good thing in a way, right? Like,
I love it. It's now I can drink beers at all.
yeah, and
all
they're also
times of
getting
the
so
day.
much better, because I remember in the beginning, like, I also had some moments where I didn't want to drink, but they were so terrible. I remember Heineken was. I'm not a big Heineken fan, coming from a Dutch guy, but most people don't like it.
Yeah.
But they were one of the first ones who actually got like a decent alcohol-free beer.
They already taste like there's no alcohol in it. Like they have that flat feel, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess that makes
We were
sense.
actually some pretty much the first ones that did an alcohol-free beers that tasted like beer. I started working on alcohol-free beer back in 2012, and as you say, back then we had 2 alcohol-free beers in Denmark from Carlsberg.
Yeah, it was barely.
And they tasted like water. With a little bit.
Yeah,
of
they
beer
kind of
flavor.
tasted a little bit worse than water, almost.
Yeah, with some beer flavored water. And then I was like, I love beer. We talked about it before the podcast. I love beer.
No
I
surprise.
still love beer. And I mean, if I can drink beer in the morning and while I run and stuff, it would be perfect. But I guess it wouldn't be smart if it has alcohol. So I wanted to create an alcohol-free beer that actually tastes like a beer.
It's kind of interesting because, like, I never think about alcohol-free as an opportunity in the daytime.
No.
I haven't gotten to that stage. So it's like, if I want to drive, then alcohol-free beer is the option. But
Otherwise, you just go to a soda, right? Like,
but yeah, I'm just thinking at the office, for example, you could actually have alcohol-free beer in the fridges. That wouldn't harm anything, but you know.
The only thing that you argue then against, of course, like how healthy it is, for example, because it is basically a soda, right? That's what you get in. I'm not sure.
No, actually,
how your
alcohol-free beer
ingredients
is
are.
very healthy. Because
The thing is, most offices already have a fridge filled with sodas.
100%.
and then alcohol-free beer is a lot better to
And
drink.
energy
than soda.
drinks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But of course,
The thing with beer is that it is natural ingredients.
yeah, that
It's
is true.
fermentation, no E-numbers, no artificial stuff, flavors and stuff, because it's not allowed in beer. The only E-number you can use in beer is caramel color, which is, So it's actually a lot more healthy than your Monster or your.
Let's give a little advertisement in the end. So offices buy. Where can they order B2B? Like where can they order as a business?
go to
Just
the
pallets.
No, I drink a lot of alcohol-free beers during the day. Actually,
It's maybe something we should indeed implement a little bit. Like it's at least fun to try. Like to just sit there, have a beer while working without the alcohol in it.
Yeah.
And again, it also does make sense, especially the direction you went in terms of doing different kind of beers, not just the typical simple ones. Then you also have more to play with, of course, to make nice alcohol-free beers.
And today, alcohol-free beers it can't, for me, it's a new category. I know you say, oh, this is an alcohol-free beer, but it's actually a new category of drinks because within alcohol-free beers, you have a lot of different styles and flavors as well. We do sour, fruity, IPAs, pilsners, everything within alcohol-free beers. So you actually have the full range of styles just without alcohol.
Do you have a word for it that's not alcohol-free beer?
No,
beer?
We just call it non-ABV alcohol-free.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but it is its own category. It's
Yeah,
not,
but I was just thinking about the name is pretty awkward for.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
yeah.
I guess it should just at some point become beer.
Yeah.
Right, where you just, let's say you walk into a Mikkeller bar and you see just a list with all the names, where you're always so intimidated to figure out what you're gonna order. I guess then the only difference would just be like, one has 0%, or the alcohol percentages, which you anyways always show. I guess that will also happen.
But if you end up coming up with a name for it, you can fix what cocktails didn't get right. And don't do virgin beer or something.
Yeah, mocktail. Yeah, that's right.
Or virgin beer.
Okay, a little punch there towards mocktails. Fair enough. But I'm honestly surprised by the 50-50. That threw me off a little bit. But nice thing to hear.
It's cool.
Mikkel, thank you so much. It was lovely to hear your story.
Thank you.
And appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a good experience. Thank you.